guys, welcome back here to the Fishing Teacher, and appreciate you guys joining me for the episode today. And guys, today I got some information and sort of some tips and advice I want to pass along with floating worms. Bright colored floating worms like this, they've been around forever. They are super fun to fish, and there is a lot of complexities to a floating worm in terms of when they work and when they don't work. So we're going to get into that in today's episode, and definitely think it's going to help you guys out a little bit. Also, guys, couple quick housekeeping tips before we get started here. Just want to remind you guys, if you're looking for a really good spinning reel, guys, you probably never considered one of these, check out the new Kastking Royal Legend spinning outfit. Guys, this is an excellent spinning reel, built for stout, man, super affordable, tournament grade all the way around. I'll have this in my Kastking link in the description of the video. Use the promo code Randy10, you get an additional discount on the reel, so appreciate that. And also, guys, real quick reminder, one of the best things you can do to increase the number of bites that you get with your slow baits is to use scent. Guys, try this new Baitpop here. Got real amino acids, real fish in it, stays on your bait forever. I'll have this in my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of the video here. I've been using it on all my soft baits for about the last 6 months, and I've really noticed the difference, so appreciate that. Okay, guys, floating worms. First of all, the ones we're talking about is the Zoom trick worm, bright colored Zoom trick worms. That's all I use for my floating worms. And a floating worm is not really an accurate depiction. They don't float on the surface. They sink slow. This is just a trick worm that's a different color, but I keep it close to the surface. So when you're talking about a floating worm, originally when the floating worms came out 40, 50 years ago, they actually had like foam in them and they floated on the surface, but they're much more effective subsurface. So I like to keep my floating worms anywhere from like 2 to 6 inches under the water when I'm working them. And I just work them, I twitch them just like a Zara spook or something like that. But the thing that I want to talk about today pretty much is when they work, when they don't want to work, and the situations they work in. Now, I'm primarily, when I'm talking about the floating worms, I'm talking about the bright colors, which the white, like a chartreuse, and the pink. These are the primary 3 colors in a floating worm. So let's talk about the real important part of it as far as the conditions they work in and the conditions they don't work in. A floating worm is a very, very situational bait in terms of the conditions have to be lined out perfect for it, as far as the water temperature, the water clarity, the mood and the personality of the fish, and the weather patterns. I'll tell you guys right off the bat, one of the most important things about fishing a floating worm once you're in floating worm season, which we'll talk about, is the weather conditions. A floating worm is at its best anytime that you have a southerly or southwesterly or westerly airflow. Something that is where your temperatures are normal or above normal, and where you have steady or falling barometric pressures, and the winds can be varying speeds, but you really need that southerly, southwesterly type airflow. If you have a frontal system that comes through and your wind switches to the north, the northwest, the northeast, or the east after the front, you can pretty much put your floating worm in the rod box. They will not hardly ever come up on it. That's a reality that I have seen over and over and over. And in bass fishing, there's not a lot of absolutes, but that is an absolute. I mean, I'm not saying you can't catch one on the thing, but you will notice a massive increase in the reduction of the strikes that you get on a floating worm after a cold front. It is a terrible post-cold front bait. Don't ever throw it after a cold front rolls through. Okay, now secondly with that, there's 2 times a year that a floating worm is going to work. It's not worth a dang in the wintertime. It starts to work when that water temperature starts to get in the upper 50s. This is when it's the best. Upper 50s to about 70 degrees is the springtime window, which is about, depending upon where you're at, it's going to be, late February to May, depending upon your part of the country. This is when bass really like a floating worm. Now, there's something about it, something about the daylight hours, the water temperature, the proximity to the spawn, whatever it is, their mood and their personality. That's when the number 1 time of the year to fish a floating worm is. Ideally, let me give you a perfect scenario for a floating worm. It would be water temperatures in the 60s. It would be some type of a south wind, some type of an overcast sky, and water visibilities between, say, like 3 to 4 foot. I like clear water for floating worm. They work in off-colored water. You can catch fish on a floating worm down in a foot of visibility and all the way up as clear as the lake gets. I mean, they'll work in gin clear water. down to about a foot. You just have to change your colors. So that's the one window. And the second window is in the fall time of the year, when the water temperatures do the same thing. When they start falling back down into the 60s, normally October or November, something like that. In a lot of parts of the country, they start biting it a little bit again, but not as good as the springtime. The springtime is twice as good as the fall time. Let's say, for example, if you go out on a good April day with a floating worm when the water temperature's in the 60s and you get 20 bites on it, you're going to maybe have half those bites in the fall time of the year if they're biting it. They don't work very good in the summertime for whatever reason. They don't when the water's warm, and they don't work when the water's cold. So it's probably when I talk about that, it's probably one of the most sensitive baits in terms of conditions that you're ever going to have. But guys, when they're biting it, it is so fun to catch them on it. It's one of the funnest baits that I have ever fished, because most of the time you can see the fish hit it if you keep it close to the surface. And seeing a bass bite a floating worm is almost more fun than seeing bass hit a topwater lure, because when you see a bass hit a floating worm, a lot of the times they come at it slow and you can actually watch them eat it. Whereas a topwater, a lot of times you just see this explosion in the water and you can't ever even see the fish. You just see the big, boil and they bite the thing. But with the floating worm, you can actually see the fish swim. And I've had so many situations where in clear water, I've seen a bass swim up behind it in slow motion and just open their mouth in slow motion and grab it and then just swim off with it. So fun to watch that. So floating worm, guys, definitely in my top 10 favorite lures to fish of all time. That's some tips and advice I'll pass along. We've done a lot of floating worm videos, but a lot of it can be rigging, colors, that type of stuff. But I really want to talk about the conditions today. So anyway, guys, hope it helps out. And also, you can get those Zoom trick worms in my tackle warehouse link in this video description if you need to get some, and appreciate it.